Oh, damn. I like make sure we on though. Hang on, hang on.
I'm sure we on. Because no, I don't see us on.
Oh,
Yes, we're on. We're on. Got it ready?
oh, oh, oh.
Yeah.
Oops. It's so bizarre because we get so excited when we go on live. We are on live. Facebook, Twitter, YouTube. We are live. Boom. All right. All right. It's working, Charlie. It's working. Thank you all for joining us on Hump Day Wednesday.
Yep.
So you guys there on YouTube and Twitter. Awesome. Awesome. Thank you for joining us tonight. Tonight we got Dr. Jonathan Dworkin, infectious disease specialist, author. We'll have some fun with him tonight. He's always a great speaker. Always a great speaker.
Yes.
How was your day, my friend?
It was long. I mean, it was long, drawn out. But I find happiness. I mean, I'm always happy now, but I find happiness in just seeing people smile. I find happiness when people get drunk and they cannot board the plane because they don't know how to act. I find happiness when people just don't want to comply and we have to be the bearer of bad news. So
And you
happiness
must
comes.
get you must get some enjoyment though when you see some drunk.
Eh?
You no, you must have some enjoyment when when you see
Oh,
them stop a drunk and having to tell that drunk, "Hey, you ain't boarding the plane." I'm sorry. It must bring some sort of enjoyment. I it would
well,
for me.
I remember when I was with the DUI team on Maui, and they said no make fun when you can pull somebody off the road, but you cannot help because it's someone to put it this way: we saved a life, nobody got injured. But I would always, I would go like today was like, how you doing? And when I got to the scene today, our good friend Khalil, that guy, he, he's crazy. But I never heard him get called so much swear names, and he was real composed. He goes, mm-hmm. That's all he could do. Was funny though. Oh boy.
Yeah, Charlie and I was just talking. At some point, somebody gonna have to make that tough decision and not allow people to drink alcohol when they get on a damn plane. People we jump on a plane. We only think about we're gonna get on a plane. I'm gonna get drunk. I'm gonna land, and it's gonna take the time away from my flight. It's gonna be people don't think about it, and I do this, Charlie, and I'm sure you do too. If something happens and you gotta crash, you gotta that plane gotta go down in the water for us in Hawaii. You gonna rely on this cartoon for help. No, there's gonna be person's gonna get in the way. Nothing happens, nothing good happens when you get on out of control drunk in any confined situation. So at some point, I know I'm pissing off a lot of people right now, but when you look at the amount of flight attendants and airline personnel getting assaulted and abused from these alcoholic drunks, sorry guys, you can't. That shouldn't be happening. That shouldn't be happening, and it's
No,
happening so frequently now. Stop serving on booze. Stop serving on booze.
this is what's gonna happen. You know the ones that sit by the exit row before they started drinking. They said, "Yep, I can lift 40 pounds. Yep, no problem." 1 hour into the flight, tiny bubbles.
Yeah,
They
yeah,
go for it. Something happened. You gotta ah, a door weigh 1,000 pounds. I cannot open the door. and
yeah.
then
Oh.
and then brother step off and he go, "Help me, I drowned." He go, "It's stupid. You should have told him you know for swim, you dummy."
Yeah, yeah. It's that is so true. That is so true. Or they pass out. They just pass out after the third or fourth hour in a flight. They're out cold. You don't can wake them up,
Yeah, that's
and
how
the
you,
clown needs to
hey,
open the door.
come on, we gotta go. The plane's sinking. Yeah, yeah, yeah. Not okay. Yeah, I see you later on. No worry. No, you going now. Ooh, I
I tell
sorry.
you.
Yeah,
No,
that's
no, no, no. First trip to Hawaii 35 years ago, I drank 18 Mai Tais on the plane, got drunk, passed out, and hung over before we landed. They were a good example right there, Laura. Thanks for being honest.
you know
But
why they say it's
a
not good
lot
for
of people, you went sleep. A lot of people no go sleep, and then they get obnoxious, and they start bothering the crew, and that's no good. That's no
you.
good.
You know how you can tell when somebody drank too much on the plane? It's not.
No.
It's not. They're not obnoxious. They just don't know that they're in shishi their pants.
Yeah, 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 yeah.
And
Yeah,
it's like
that happens.
walking towards you and you go, is that a new design? The pants look two tone.
You know that is actually a trending design now. They're making pants with the like with the darkened area in your crotch to make like you would pee yourself. And people are buying that. Like, why would you spend money? Just pee your pants before you go out. Just pee your pants. Save your money. But no, it's true, Charlie. That is, I saw it on TV. Almost had a heart attack. I was thinking, you guys, I tell you, and people are buying this stuff. They're buying these pants. It started off with the ripped jeans. The rip. Everybody buy. They spend extra money for have the jeans with cuts inside. Like, buy the cheap jeans, cut them yourself, and save money. I don't get it. My kids all get that kind of jeans. Like, what's wrong with you folks? What's wrong with you? But no, that's the style. That's the style. Okole style. Crazy. First flights now only serve alcohol in first class. It's the bars at the airport. I don't know. Every flight I've ever flown on, they load them up in the people in coach. I wish that was true, but again, then you're separating again first class versus coach. Everybody got to get the same. Sorry, all these rich people fly first class. Sorry, man. You cannot drink when you're driving. Yeah, if you can do without drinking for a flight, you can. And it's just the problem is what can happen when these drunk people get crazy on the plane and people get hurt. People get
Terrible.
hurt.
It's
Yeah.
terrible. It's so terrible. Today. Well, I gotta say, today was hilarious. And I asked the gentleman. I said, is that your wife? And he said, no, that's a long distance relationship. I go, well, she's going down there by the grass and just let her sleep it off. He goes, well, if she ain't ready by the time we got to take off tonight, I guess I'll see her when I see her. I said, oh, brother.
Yeah. Yeah, you can. I mean, he cannot fly. His flight, he got to wait, catch a later flight. He's got to fly next to her as a drunk in the plane. He's probably. I
Yep.
would get on that plane without her. I would get on the plane without her. Deborah says Southwest doesn't serve alcohol, and Barbara says American doesn't serve unless you're in first class. Thanks for the info. Always
Hmm.
appreciate the info. Bad drunks should quit drinking. Absolutely, Nani. I mean, but bad drunks don't quit. That's the problem. That's why they're bad drunks,
So let me
unfortunately.
ask you a calculative question. If
Go
you're in a
ahead,
left
sir.
row and somehow the pilot can make the plane fly backwards, does that consider you sitting in first class?
Yeah,
Okay.
absolutely. Absolutely.
Okay.
Yeah. But if your plane was flying in backwards, you wouldn't have to worry what class you're in. And you better pray that drunk is not at the emergency exit door because you.
So you don't need to worry because that drunk is flying the plane.
Yeah. Hmm. Hmm. I'm not going to touch that one. But yeah. Remember when the plane was flying, I don't know, that little airplane, what Mid Pacific or whatever it was flying from Honolulu to the Big Island,
Yep. And
and
they
they
bypass.
finally,
Yep.
it was on
We,
their way to California.
yep.
And then he woke up and he said, must have been the oxygen level. No, maybe it was the booze, bro. Maybe it was the booze.
Yep.
Anyway. Anyway, folks, while you guys are on, let me go ahead and share this real quick. For those of you on Kauai, this Saturday, October 2nd, the Marshallese Association of Kauai is having their community event, pop up COVID vaccinations, but not just vaccinations. They're doing support services, rent and utility assistance, 9 a.m. to 1 p.m. in Isenberg Park, right there in Lihui, behind AT&T. That big Isenberg Park back there, the baseball park, and right behind the Lihui Neighborhood Center. They got all kind of programs, guys, all kinds of support services. Want to thank Cece for sharing this with me, and I told her I would share it tonight. This Saturday, October 2nd, 9 a.m. till 1 p.m., Isenberg. Please stop by and make sure you get the services that are being provided for you guys for free. For free, guys. Go check it out. Check it out. I'll probably stop by. I know over there gets service, so I'll probably stop by and do a real quick live Saturday morning. But yeah, please, guys, if if you live on Kauai and you're looking for services, they got rent and utility assistance. They're gonna have all different types of services, including the vaccinations. All right. So hope to see you guys there on Saturday. Numbers, Charlie. Numbers seems like it's going down. I really appreciated the Department of Health today, really making it clear that even though our numbers are trending downwards, the average daily numbers are still over 300, over 325, and the deaths, people, 13 deaths. And I understand the Big Island Kilauea is erupting. I understand that. And I watched the news and they talked to the guy, the scientist. He said no one is at risk because it's high up at the summit. At this point, there's no one at risk. But when you turn on the news, tonight's top story: Kilauea volcano is erupting. Not that 13 people died today. No, it was Kilauea erupting, and they spent probably 10, 12 minutes on Kilauea erupting, and the deaths came after that. That is why people. That's why I think the messaging, and it's the media, it's the state. I understand it's more attractive. The beautiful pictures of the volcano erupting, it is beautiful, but the lead story should be we lost 13 people today. That should be the lead story, um, and it's not, and it's not. Is Facebook freezing for anyone? Some Cheryl is saying her Facebook is freezing. I don't see any problems on our side. So anyone else? Anyone else?
Yeah. Well, I see here. Oh, last night I wanted to say thank you to this lovely lady that I met for the first time. Her name is Kathy Ellis. She works at the Kauai Humane Society, and she was there to pick up an animal that was being shipped from somewhere else, and it goes straight into quarantine. But as I was walking to my office, all I heard is this yell, "Uncle Charlie, Uncle Charlie!" And as always, I turn around and look, and there she was. And she says, "Is that you, Uncle Charlie?" And I goes, "Well, yes, it is." And I saw her name, Kathy Ellis. And she says, "I just have to say thank you so much. I watch you and Uncle Mel. Thank you so much for what you do. And I just wanted to say hi. And hopefully one day I'll get to go up and meet Uncle Mel. And I'm going to say hi to him too." I go, "Well, thank you so very much for your kindness and your kind words." And I said, we try our best." She goes, "Please, I know you folks do it every night. Can you also do it every day?" I go, "No, let's not push it now. Let's not push it." But it was just, it was just really nice of her. Nice lady. And I just wanted to say thank you. We
Yeah,
get those kind of moments every once in a while.
it's awesome. The amount of messages we get, the thanks. Hey, that's the reward, man. That's the reward. To see you
Kind of,
guys. I'd love to do this every night. I really would like to do it every night. But part of the thing is we don't want to overstay our welcome. We don't
yes,
want to. we want to make sure we got the content that you folks are interested in, uh, and make it worthwhile, because that's what
Hmm.
we said we would do. And but I love you guys' comments. I love you guys sharing this. I mean, the best thing you can all do, and not for Mel and Charlie, but for our community, is share it. Share it
Yep.
on your Facebook. Share it on your YouTube.
Yep.
Share it on your Twitter, on your
Hmm.
LinkedIn. Share it and get the word out. The important information. Dr. Dworkin just texted me. He's actually going to be in about a minute. In fact, he is here. I'm so happy that this thing is working tonight, but you don't even know. Last night I kind of freaked out. Kind of freaked out. Oh, you hear the cookie frogs. First thing, you hear the cookie frogs.
Sorry, I'm just getting my volume up. Can you guys hear me?
Oh yeah,
All right, good.
absolutely. How are
Perfect.
you, my friend? How you doing, bro?
Doing well. You guys have a new setup here, huh?
Hmm.
Yeah, we just keep our fingers crossed that it continues to work. Last night we had some technical issues. We had to go back to the Zoom. I actually really like this format better because we can actually post questions on, and we can do some fancy things. But yeah, last night we had some issues. I don't know what it was. It wasn't you. It wasn't any of the platforms. It was my streaming software. So I know a lot of people said, "Oh my God, they're blocking you, Mel." No, no, they did. It was my streaming software. I called tech support today, and we just don't know what happened. Could have been an internet issue. I just don't know. But it's working tonight, and we're happy to have you, Doc. Thank you.
Thanks. It's a pleasure to be here.
Lot of stuff to talk about tonight. How's the Big Island, by the way? I know you guys got a volcano erupting. What else? What else is going on the Big Island?
It's always a little bit wild here today, man. I woke up in the morning and my dogs were chasing around piglets all around the front yard and had to deal with that. Uh, COVID wise, we're past peak, which is nice. So we finally are catching our breath a little bit, you know,
Hmm.
and that's a good thing. At peak, just to give you guys a sense of how it was, about half the hospital was filled with COVID. So about 50% of the beds. This was a couple weeks ago, and the entire ICU. It's a small ICU. Was filled with COVID, and 100% of the patients in the hospital at peak were unvaccinated. Total, we had about I think we had two vaccinated out of all the admissions in the hospital during this wave, and they both were people who were frail and with comorbid medical illnesses. So it was
Hmm.
about 90% across the whole Queens system unvaccinated. So this was a big wave, and for us, it was the nastiest wave. For me, it was the hardest personally because it felt so unnecessary, at least on the hospital side. Um, so I could talk a little bit more about that and about how management of the disease was different. There were some important differences. Every time we have a wave, it seems like I'm doing different stuff. We've got different technology and different toys and different approaches, and we have gotten much more sophisticated than we were at the beginning.
So
Sure.
let's start by. Well, I want to ask you a question first,
Sure.
and that is based on what you're seeing now, what we're all seeing about on the decline. What's your feeling about being prepared? Because we've been through this phase before, but this last time was like the most fiercest it got. The numbers went down, we got complacent, and man, it just ramped up to the point that we just couldn't control it.
Yeah.
What's your take on it? Do you feel that we have enough individuals statewide vaccinated enough that if they come in contact with each other, this thing will be so mild that it just bounce off like a pinball machine, just bounce around. And because I think the ultimate goal is not anyone getting so seriously ill that they end up in the ICU and possibly die, right? And so
Yeah.
that's why we get vaccinated. But I just get fearful because it's like living through a nightmare. We've seen this before. We've seen all the identifiable traits of it, or the characteristics, I should say, that when it's going down. And I understand people are locked up for so long or are
Yeah.
restricted that they want to let their hair down. but they just don't do it in ways that's deemed safe. And all of a sudden, bingo, they bounce back up. What's your feel
Yeah.
on this thing, Doc?
Well, one of the questions I was asking myself at the beginning of the wave, and I wonder if other people were asking this too, was, was I wrong? Were we wrong to think that we were getting out of this with the rollout of the vaccination campaign earlier this year? And I struggled with that a little bit at the beginning. My short answer is I don't think so. Maybe we were a little bit. I think we were surprised by how contagious this was and by how aggressive it was. If you had told me a month before or 2 months before that we were going to see numbers that were like 3 to 4 times higher than our previous peak, I would have thought, wow, that's worse than I expected. But the bottom line is we still just had a lot of non-immune people, prior to the Delta wave in our state. We did well last year, so we probably only had 5 to 10% of the state that got naturally infected, and then we vaccinated about 60%, and there was a fair amount of overlap. So we still had 30 to 40% of people totally non-immune, and this is just way too contagious a virus to have that level of non-immune people and not have it explode. So the question is, where are we now? And I think we probably infected another 10% of the state during this wave. I wish we had really good breakdown. We've talked about this before on how many people who were infected, how many of them are reinfections, how many of them are vaccinated, how many of them are truly non-immune. From some of the internal data I saw from talking to some of the testing guys within various systems, the majority of positive tests were still in unvaccinated patients, to the extent that we were able to tease out who was what, and in some numbers I saw it was as high as 70 or 80%. And certainly hospitalizations, it was like 90%, right? So I think a lot of these infections were in people who lacked previous immunity. And does that mean we're in a better situation now? Well, probably we are in a somewhat better situation in terms of additional waves. If you look at like the Northeast, for example, they had about 30% of the population got infected, last year. And then they vaccinated about 60%. And they did not have this massive explosion that we're having, and I actually was just over there about a month ago. And it's a different world. I mean, they had an increase in cases when Delta hit, but it's more like a simmer. It didn't overboil like it did here. And that's despite behavior that I saw there that's markedly worse in terms of disease control. I mean, a lot of people just aren't wearing masks at all. And this is not Texas or Florida. This is the Northeast. These are blue states, but they're highly vaccinated like we are, and they had more natural immunity than we did. And the result is that life is a lot less bent out of shape by the Delta wave than it was here. So, are we going to get to some situation like that? Well, yeah, I think we will. But there's still enough non-immune people in our state that I think we could suffer additional waves, and that's one of the big questions right now. As to how bad that will be.
I remember not long ago, you were here and you were saying that if we don't change what we're doing, if we don't get more people vaccinated, the next wave. I remember you saying this would get. I think you said it'll be ugly. I think that was your exact words, and you were right, sir. You were right. I mean, this last wave got ugly.
Yeah.
We lost a lot of people. A lot of people got very, very sick. Doc, I'm going to throw up some questions. I know you're an infectious disease specialist. I'm going to just throw up a bunch of questions from our viewers. Um, on TV today, there was a young man from Texas who said he was anti-vaccine because he's Catholic and they're using aborted fetuses for the vaccine. Where did he get this information from? Blah blah blah. It's we know that the popes have both. The popes have made it very clear and advised their people to get vaccinated. But I just want to let you answer that question because you're the expert.
There's like a vaccine mandate in the Vatican now. Not only did the Pope come out in favor of vaccination, but like you can't get near the Pope if you're not vaccinated, or they're heading in that direction very quickly. So I'm certainly no expert on Catholicism, but it seems to me pretty clear that the leadership of the Catholic Church wants Catholics to get vaccinated. I think one of the adenovirus vector vaccines, I think the Johnson and Johnson, some of the cell lines that they use are derived decades ago from fetuses, but they're not dependent on any recent abortions. These are old cell lines that have been like sitting in labs for decades. And the church did some analysis, some theological analysis, and decided that that's okay because you're not promoting abortion. They're not using any abortion to generate the vaccine, and the tissue that's decades old is there and should be used. So I think that's the basis for the Catholic Church recommendation. But as we know, people who are against it find reasons to be against it, even if they're they have to stretch and twist a little bit. So I'm not surprised that that kind of thing is coming up.
Again, there are no stupid questions. If you have contracted COVID and have had symptoms and had to be hospitalized, would you be able to get the vaccine to avoid future infections?
Yeah, there's actually a lot of information that's come out since the last time we talked on this. That's pretty exciting. So, um, there's an immunologist, I think at UCSD, Shane Karate, who's done a lot of work on immunity, and he's done work with natural immunity. He's looked at vaccine immunity. He's looked at, well, what if you've had natural infection and then you get a shot of a vaccine, or the other way around, if you have a vaccine and then you get a breakthrough infection. And they're doing much more sophisticated analysis of the immune system than ever really existed before. It used to be that we would just check antibody levels, and we still check antibody levels because antibody levels are kind of, if your antibody levels are high, you're not likely to get infected. You're not likely to get a symptomatic infection. So it still matters. But what we're finding with both vaccine immunity and natural immunity is that people get a big surge in antibodies, and then the antibodies begin to taper down a little bit. So the question is, how protected are you? And what they're doing now is they're looking at a lot of different types of immune responses. They're looking at things like memory B cells. They're looking at T cell responses. And what they're looking for is, okay, so maybe your antibody levels drop a little bit, but if you have those memory B cells and you have those T cells, can you respond when you're challenged by the infection? And can you respond quicker than if you've never been exposed? And the answer is yes. And a lot of these breakthrough cases or reinfections, if you're naturally infected, they tend to be mild because what happens is you get a little symptomatic upper respiratory thing, and then your memory B cells come online. It's like a factory with the lights out, is one way to think about it. It was an analogy that Shane Karate used. And then the lights come back on and you start pumping out these antibodies. By day 3, by day 4, you're starting to clear the thing and you don't get the severe infection that you got before. So the best immunity, it turns out, actually is if you've been naturally infected, and especially if you had a significant infection, and then you get a single dose of a vaccine after your natural infection, that appears to produce very, very, very robust and also broad immunity. And there was even some evidence that some of those people were immune to SARS-1, which is a completely different virus. So that's how broad the immunity was. So, and what we think is going on with those people is you get infected, so you have all these memory B cells and memory T cells, and you can get reinfected. Being infected, well, there's a couple problems with being naturally infected, aside from the fact that you might get really sick and you might transmit it to somebody else. One is that you can get reinfected, and particularly you may be susceptible to getting reinfected with variants. But what happens is if we boost you with the vaccine, you get this very, very, very robust antibody response that's already been primed by the natural infection, and then you get antibodies, not just to the wild type virus, but your B cells actually start producing, slightly variant antibodies that are useful against the variant forms of COVID. And that also seems to happen after 2 vaccine shots, and especially there may be some evidence now emerging that it happens after a 3rd vaccine shot. So it's a little early to say, but we may end up having a 3-shot vaccine regimen like we do for other regimens, so that we can mimic that effect without people getting sick from natural infection. But all of that's a long-winded way of saying, yeah, if you've been naturally infected, get at least 1 dose, and you're going to be in much better shape going forward.
So let's kind of like turn back the hands of time, right? Where this all started.
Yeah.
So is it likely that we can have another form of this virus develop, because it started with animals, right? Way back, and the consumption of it, or those wet markets they talked about it. Because I'm just trying to look from the standpoint that that was a situation that sort of developed it going in this direction. Are there other things that we haven't even scratched the tip of the iceberg yet that could go into some other direction that might be 10 to say 100 times worse than what we got it now? I hope not, but who knows, right? The future what the future holds. Do
Yeah,
you
I mean,
do you think we're overall prepared to handle something big since we've been through this?
well, yeah, I mean, that's the $1 million question. I think that's if there's one sort of driving question at the end of my book, that's the question is have we learned what we need to learn so that we can do better next time? And what does doing better next time look like? What systems do we have to have in place? In terms of coronavirus origins, it's still muddy. We've talked about this a little bit before. We haven't found the natural reservoir for this thing or the natural emergence pathway, and we haven't audited that lab because they won't let us audit it, right? So I think it's a little bit obscure. I could imagine a virus that is more deadly than this virus. The number that's often thrown around now is about a 0.5% to 1% mortality rate with this virus, which is bad. That doesn't sound like a lot, but that's terrible. And what you got to keep in mind is that it's that bad despite us doing everything that we can do in the hospital, right? So, one question I ask myself is, what would have happened if COVID had hit, us 100 years ago, pre-modern medicine, you know, and or 200 years ago, because we're comparing this 0.5% mortality rate to these infections that are historical infections. So what would have happened if this had hit us in our previous history? Where we didn't really have a good understanding of epidemiology, we didn't really have a good understanding of masks. We didn't have medications that we could bring online quickly, like steroids, IL-6 inhibitors, antiviral therapies, the things that we're using. Maybe we don't even have oxygen for supportive therapy for people, right? And in 1918, when influenza hit, not everybody could access oxygen, supportive oxygen. So I suspect that if this virus had hit us, a couple hundred years ago, the mortality would have been probably 10 times higher. It would have been 5 to 10%, and it would have been more in line with some of those historical plagues. Smallpox was maybe 20 or 30%. So you can imagine a virus that is as contagious as this, or even more contagious and more deadly. And the question is, do we now have the system in place that would allow us to respond to that immediately? And I suspect we've learned some things from this, but I suspect the answer is still no, because here are some things that are on my money list. We never set up centralized quarantine in the state of Hawaii. We just let people quarantine at home. Well, the places that took epidemic control really seriously did centralized quarantine right from the get-go. Obviously, we never developed post-arrival testing, which has been a big topic on your show. So there's a number of things like that. We don't have capacity in terms of rapid antigen testing, locally produced rapid antigen tests, which would allow us to safely open up a number of places. So there are a number of things that I think we could do and that we should still be pushing to do that would get us in much better shape for next time. And there will be a next time. The Delta variant was a preview of that because the virus essentially doubled in contagiousness as part of one of the late waves of the virus. And you saw what happened. We almost got overrun. The hospitals were back to being full again, and we had to shut down a lot of things. So I would say that those are the things that I'm thinking about in terms of that.
Mhm.
Yeah,
Okay.
I mean, I think, and we'll get to your book. Dr. Dworkin's also an author. We'll be sharing the link in a little bit. Um, One of the topics Charlie brings up a lot, and we're all concerned about, and I think what you just talked about, the post-arrival testing, centralized quarantine, all of these travel related precautionary things that we can do. Charlie keeps asking the question of all of our experts. We can be, our population can be 60%, 70% vaccinated, but every day we get more people coming in. With so many visitors daily and loose mitigation measures for travel, can we really get vaccinated enough to totally relax behavior? That's a great question, Kara. Great question.
Yeah. Well, I think as other people who are better epidemiologists than me have pointed out, like Tim Brown, you're still going to have some transmission even if you hit a very high rate of vaccination because it's contagious and there will be a certain amount of breakthrough. But I personally think that the number one thing that we could do is hit a higher rate of vaccination, and And I'll explain. And before I explain why, I just want to start with a caveat that this whole idea that we're gonna have complete control of the border, we're going to do pre-travel testing, we're going to do centralized quarantine or at least quarantine enforcement, we're going to do post-arrival testing. I'm a big supporter of that. I was a big supporter of that in 2020. And all the other things that we did too, the contact tracing, expanding our testing capacity, engaging with the communities that had sub-epidemics that were driving up the larger epidemic. There were a lot of public health things that we did, mask wearing, ventilation strategies that were extremely important and were absolutely the right thing to do in 2020. I call the sort of extreme version of this kind of the fortress Hawaii, where we're putting up the wall and we're using the ocean as a moat and we're keeping the damn thing out. And I think it was absolutely the right thing to do last year and into the beginning of this year. And I think it's going to backfire badly if we misapply that strategy now. And the reason why I say that is because there's really ultimately only one way out of a pandemic, and that's through immunity. So you have to get people vaccinated, and you have to give vaccinated people a way out of the pandemic. And you can't do that if you're putting people in sort of permanent sort of shutdown kind of scenarios. It murders the public health messaging, and what it tells people is, hey, you've done the right thing and you've gone and you've gotten vaccinated, but you're stuck in this forever because we don't really trust that the vaccine's going to work. And the data actually suggests otherwise. The data suggests that the vaccines are actually working very well. They weren't perfect in terms of preventing infection during this latest wave. And what happened was we had a highly contagious virus that hit the population right as antibody levels were beginning to drop. So we saw some breakthrough. But there's actually a number of studies now that showed that your risk of getting infected was a lot lower if you were vaccinated, and your risk of transmitting was a lot lower if you got vaccinated. And I'll give you guys a couple of examples of that kind of data. So we had the Provincetown study that came out that scared the crap out of everybody a couple months ago, where they showed that fully vaccinated people could transmit Delta to each other and have high viral loads. And the talking point after that study was, oh my God, the vaccines aren't doing anything, and anybody who's vaccinated can transmit to anybody else. And they're useless for blocking transmission. So we all just have to go put N95s on our faces for the rest of our lives. And it doesn't matter if you're vaccinated or not. And it turns out that was really wrong. They only checked viral loads on those people one time, and they didn't really give a lot of details about how they did clinically. And there's a bunch of other stuff that's come out since that sort of paints a more full picture. I'll give you guys a couple of examples. There was the study from Singapore, which I think Tim Brown referenced when he was on with you guys, where they checked viral loads at a couple of different points in time. And what they found was people who were vaccinated cleared the virus faster. So they're probably not contagious for nearly as long, even when they have breakthrough infection, right? There was a paper from China where they actually had a Delta outbreak in a city in southern China. And they looked at who got sick and who transmitted it. And they did very, very, very aggressive contact tracing, as they do in China. And what they showed was people who had received vaccines, and presumably these were vaccines, were much less likely to transmit it in their houses and to their relatives than people who didn't. I think the risk of transmitting was like 3 times higher or something like that if you were unvaccinated. And again, these are people who were symptomatic, right? There was some studies. There was a study done in the Netherlands where they looked at healthcare workers who got infected, and unvaccinated healthcare workers were just pouring virus out of their secretions, and they could culture the virus very easily. The vaccinated healthcare workers, they had trouble culturing the virus. And then my favorite is there was a big study done in healthcare workers, a multi-state study in the United States. I think mostly in Texas and Arizona, but in a few other states as well. It was multiple hospitals. And what they did was they actually did testing, and they did asymptomatic testing weekly on doctors and nurses. So you could get a test if you were feeling sick, but you could also just get a test weekly because you were an employee, which I think is the gold standard way to do this, because it gets at this issue of, well, what if you're asymptomatically transmitting, right? And again, that they found that even during the Delta variant, the vaccines were still 50 to 60% effective at blocking any kind of infection, right? And this was before we started boosting people who were at high risk. So I think the vaccines work. They work for keeping people from getting severely ill. They definitely block transmission. And the idea that we're going to skip vaccines or ignore vaccines and that we're going to win by making everybody wear N95 masks indoors forever, or hiring 10,000 contact tracers and tracing every bowel movement in the state of Hawaii. It's crazy, man. It's just crazy. There's no endpoint for that strategy. And I think it's a sign that some people really have a separate political or social agenda that's not the same as actually getting through this. Because the way to get through this is to get 100% of us immune. And we're going to get immune one way or the other. The only question is, do we get immune through death and destruction, or do we get immune through vaccination? And there's no doubt in my mind, having just gone through the Delta wave in the hospitals here, what is the better way to do that?
Well, Doc, it seems apparent that there are individuals that have the same access that many of us to information, right?
Mm-hmm.
But it's just that they look through a different set of lenses for some reason. And
Yeah.
when that information comes out from them, it already starts by taking it off the rails and pushing it down a hill that really has no end in sight. So it's just like the misinformation plot keeps on just replicating itself, and it's always like, if we want to get out of this, we got to fight it hard and try to bring an end to that so we can pay attention to this.
Yeah. Yeah.
Do you ever?
And to be clear, I don't mean to disparage the public health strategies. I
Mhm.
think they're absolutely appropriate. And when the wave was peaking, for us a couple of weeks ago, I think it was
Yeah,
absolutely appropriate to try to restrict activities and do the kinds of things we were doing in 2020 to reduce caseloads so that we could get through it without a hospital crisis. Once the hospitals get overwhelmed, the mortality rate's going to go up just because the hospitals are overwhelmed, right? So we have to do public health. It's not either or. But ultimately, the only exit ramp is to get immune, right? So,
right.
so the idea is you can't skip the exit ramp and just put us in a permanent, Fortress Hawaii kind of stance, because you actually see places that have done this, and it's not going very well right now. You look at Australia or New Zealand; these are countries that I looked up to and admired for their response in 2020, early 2021, but they didn't get people vaccinated, and because they were so successful with these very aggressive public health strategies, the number that they're going to have to hit with their vaccination plan is ridiculous. They're going to have to get like 95% or better vaccinated in order to be able to ever open up without having a massive wave, right? And I suspect what's going to happen is that they're going to have big waves, because that's going to be
Mhm.
very hard to get such a high number.
Right.
Um, and you see in New Zealand, even in New Zealand, where they did a tremendous job with public health, and I admire them. They just had a big Delta wave in New Zealand. It's so contagious that those types of strategies, even when you have buy-in from your population, even when you have strong political leadership, even when you have social cohesion, it still is very difficult to control something this contagious using those strategies. So there's no doubt in my mind that the exit is immunization. And then once we're immunized, we have to reward the people who have done the right thing and taken on the very small risk and inconvenience of a vaccine in order to serve the community and serve their neighbors. We have to give them some benefit from that, right? So I was talking to Derek, who's been brilliant on these issues the other day, and I was just shooting from the hip a little bit, but I thought, if I could be, word protector or dictator or whatever for a month or two and design our border control, I would absolutely increase the border control protections. I would want more testing, in particular post-arrival testing, but I would still preserve the incentive for vaccination. I wouldn't want people who are vaccinated to feel like they're being treated no differently than somebody who's obviously higher risk, right? So one way to do that, for example, would be if we developed rapid antigen testing, which we should be doing and we should have done. And I've been banging on this drum a lot. My fantasy would be you arrive in Hawaii and you're vaccinated and you get a rapid antigen test, or you're unvaccinated. Either way, you get a rapid antigen test, and ideally it's a made in Hawaii rapid antigen test, right? And maybe we charge an extra $20 on the ticket or something to pay for that. And we hand it and we say, here's your made in Hawaii rapid antigen test. I can hear people already saying, "Oh, Dr. Dworkin, that's corrupt." Yup, tough bananas. Tough bananas. Welcome to paradise. Here's your made in Hawaii rapid antigen test. And here's a one pager that comes with it that says, okay, we want you to take this test, in 3 days or 4 days. And here's the instructions. And if it's positive, you can get a PCR test at any of these places to confirm the infection. It's a risk reduction strategy. So if you're vaccinated, you're a lot less likely to be carrying virus and be contagious, especially if you're asymptomatic vaccinated. You're probably pretty low risk, but you're not zero risk. You just went through an airport, you just did ground transport, you just went through a security line, God knows what, right? And you're here for some social event. So we know you're not no risk. So here's a rapid antigen test, and you can take it. And if it's positive, we're not going to penalize you or anything like that. But you just be safe. And here's a mask that you put on, and you go get checked out, right? And that would be a way to sort of incrementally open up and to reward people who've done the right thing by being vaccinated. You're unvaccinated, frankly, I don't even want you here. But if you're coming, certainly it's a pre-travel test, it's a quarantine, and it's a post-arrival test, and a big inconvenience, and it's all on you, right? And that way you increase the level of safety for everyone, but you still preserve the incentive. And I think it's so important. I can't tell you guys, I've had a bunch of patients who have gotten vaccinated just so that they could reduce the inconvenience and the hassle of traveling, And these were people who were real hard-headed. And I talked to them about their risk factors for getting in the hospital, and that made no impact on them. And I talked to them about protecting their families and their neighbors, and that made no impact on them. And then they realized that they could avoid a hassle at the airport, so they went and they got their Johnson & Johnson. I've had this happen several times already. And it's taught me something. I respond to stuff like that. Not everybody's psychology is the same as mine, right? Some people really are wired different, and they're not going to do things for the reasons that I think they should do them. They're going to do things for other reasons. So I would want to preserve that architecture in any kind of scheme that we have. And we should absolutely have the rapid antigen testing available. It's crazy. It's nuts that we haven't developed this locally yet, because it's not only going to be useful now, it's going to be useful for the next thing that happens, right? And wouldn't it be wonderful if we could work with a local biotech company the next time there's a problem? That would be part of the pandemic plan for the future.
It leads us into the next question from Dana. I saw that the R1 variant is here and vaccine resistant. What's Dr. Dworkin's thought on this one?
Yeah, I saw a little stuff on R1. The other one that everybody was worried about is Mu. So I've been looking into these. My understanding, and I just looked at the variant report recently, is that we're still almost entirely Delta. And the question with these newer variants is, are they going to be able to outcompete Delta? Some of them seem to be be able to escape vaccine immunity a little bit better, but you have to be careful with that, because a lot of what those studies are doing is they're just looking at like neutralization assays. They're just looking at how well antibodies neutralize the thing in a test tube, and that may, if you're a COVID variant that is a little bit harder to neutralize in a test tube, that may make it more likely that you're going to cause a breakthrough infection. But you have to remember, if somebody's fully vaccinated, or if they're naturally infected and then they get a single shot, they've got a B cell and a T cell library in their body that is producing not just antibodies against the original wild type strain, but also slightly tweaked antibodies. So they're highly likely to mount an effective immune response, right? So the thing I really worry about with variants is, are we going to see some gigantic shift? Are we going to get like a recombination event? Maybe a human COVID variant swaps RNA with a mink virus or something like that, and then we get something that's completely different, that's true vaccine escape. I worry more about that. I think that's still a possibility. I don't know how likely that is. It's possible. The longer we go with significant portions of the world unvaccinated, the more likely that's going to happen. But what we're seeing now with these variants, the Lambda, the Mu, the R1, is you get some sequential mutations. But one of the cool things about the immune response is that it does seem to be broad, in the sense that you're able to adapt even to variants. One of the big questions that came up, I don't know if it was the last time I was on, guys, or it might have been the time before that, was we were saying, well, what about variant-specific boosters? I know vaccine to original Wuhan strain COVID, but now we've got Delta. Should we be boosting with the Delta-specific variant or a Lambda-specific variant, or maybe some sort of polyvalent vaccine that's got several variants in it? And the evidence that's come out since then has actually been fairly encouraging. There was a Moderna study where they boosted people just with the wild type shot, the original shot, and then they boosted some people with I think Beta, the South African variant, and then they boosted other people with a mix. And what they found was no matter which booster they used, they developed broad neutralizing antibody responses against all the current circulating variants. Isn't that cool? I wouldn't have expected that. But what that tells you is that your immune system is smart, and once it sees something 2 or 3 times, it starts to say, maybe I'm going to keep seeing this thing, and maybe I should have a repertoire of antibodies that I can produce in case the thing changes over time. So I think that's a point of optimism on this question about variants, right? And I'm less worried about getting a variant-specific vaccine booster. And I think probably at some point I'm going to get the 3rd shot because it's been 8 months for me or something like that. And I like the idea of having this library that allows me to attack any common variant that comes around.
So, having just heard what you said, my question to this is, if someone was to take uh, several vaccination shots,
Yeah.
what studies are being done now to see how much the human body can handle? Because there seems to be this fear that if you take this one brand, you should stick with it and don't change. Where
Yeah.
because the messages I get, and it goes back to what I asked you earlier, is that it seems like those who put out, I don't want to call it misinformation. It almost seems as if they're putting out information that have all the important stuff all being redacted for some reason, and so everybody bypasses that, right? So
Yeah.
now, if you've got vaccines that definitely shows it's working, is there some tests being done right now to say, okay, a human can actually stand, uh, say, five shots or something to that effect?
I think on the street that theory is being tested. So there are people who have gotten more shots. The fear is that if you keep giving people shot, there's 2 fears. One fear is, will it lose effectiveness? Will the immune response just sort of go amnestic and kind of burn out, and you're not getting the same response, right? That's a theoretical concern. Another concern is, will you get accumulating side effects? So we know, for example, people get a flu-like response when they get the shot. That's okay. We know that that's not dangerous. But there were some more rare side effects that were, 1 in 10,000, 1 in 20,000, like myocarditis in young men, right? So if you give people multiple shots, are you going to see more of that, right? Those are concerns.
Mm.
The booster data that's come out so far from Pfizer and Moderna suggests no, and I'm not particularly concerned because the 3rd shot that we're talking about giving people is 6+ months out. So you've had plenty of time to rest those T cells and those B cells, right? And you're typically doing it when the antibody titer is starting to come down a little bit. And these are already very rare side effects. So I don't think we're going to see a big surge in myocarditis. The Israelis now have given millions of booster shots and are not reporting that problem. If you were to give people a bunch of shots in really short order without giving the immune system time to recover, I might be a little bit more concerned about that. So I don't suggest that people just go, jack themselves up with multiple shots in a short time period. And that may also create a less high quality immune response too, because the part of what we're learning is that to get a really high quality immune response, you need to give it some time. The immune system needs a day off, just like you do. And one of the reasons why Pfizer may be having some issues is because they did that 3-week interval. And it's possible that the ideal interval was probably 4 weeks or 6 weeks or 8 weeks. We're seeing some of the countries that did that out of necessity seem to be having better, more prolonged immune responses. And there's some precedents for that with other viruses, where if you space them out a little bit, you get a better response. So this is all stuff that's still being worked out. And I'm sure that you could create a scenario where you're giving too many shots. But I don't think that's the problem we have right now. I think probably what we're seeing so far with the 3rd shot is that the antibody titers are higher than they were with the 2nd shot, and the immune library is broader, which suggests that there's still room for the immune response to improve with the strategy. Now, will that be true for a 4th shot or a 10th shot? I don't know. We have to be careful trying to project years into the future.
Okay.
Doc, what is the latest? We get a lot of questions, and we see that I think director of Department of Health said that we should stick to the vaccine that you originally got. But what is the latest recommendations as far as mixing and matching? Let's start with J&J because it's a separate type, and then we'll go to Pfizer, Moderna. What's the latest information out on that?
So there's no recommendation yet to do a boost shot if you've gotten a J&J or a Moderna. There may be something coming on that. The preliminary data from both those countries again suggests that an extra shot seems to help, and the J&J efficacy was up into the 90% or greater with the second shot. So they released some data on that. I don't think it's been peer reviewed yet, so you have to be a little bit careful with this stuff. Some of this stuff is just being released, and then we're commenting on it without it actually going through like a proper vetting, right? But the number that they were able to hit with their second shot was very equivalent to the other mRNA vaccines, but there's still not a recommendation that they need a second shot, and or when they need a second shot. We know from the Europeans that if you give an AstraZeneca, which is similar to Johnson and Johnson, they're both adenovirus vaccines. If you give that as the first shot and then you give an mRNA vaccine as the second shot, that particular combination seems to produce very, very, very good antibody responses and breadth of immune response. So, I think there's some theoretical underpinning for doing a J&J and then an mRNA vaccine, but there's no recommendation to do that yet, right? Moderna, there was a paper that came out of the Mayo Clinic recently where they compared the different vaccines and they looked at Delta and they looked at Breakthrough, and they actually found that Moderna was holding up very, very, very well compared to any other vaccine. And the thought was, well, first of all, it's a higher dose. It turns out the Moderna is about 3 times the dose as the Pfizer in terms of it's just a big slug of mRNA. And the Moderna side effects are a little bit more intense. People had more flu-like syndrome and stuff like that the first day or two afterwards. So it doesn't surprise me that their duration is proving to be a little bit greater. And this is the first study that I've seen that really separates Pfizer from Moderna, right? The other big difference, of course, is that Moderna is 4 weeks between doses as opposed to 3 weeks. So between the increased dose and the increased spacing, that may account for some of that difference between the Moderna and the Pfizer. So then the question is, well, do you need a third shot if you've gotten Moderna, right? If you've gotten 2 shots of Moderna, do you even need a third shot? And I don't know. I think that's the next big question coming before FDA. The Mayo Clinic study seems to suggest that it was doing very well. So maybe you could wait a little bit before considering a third shot for those patients. So the only official recommendation right now is if you got 2 Pfizers, like me, because I'm at the hospital, and you're in one of these risk categories, is to get a third shot of Pfizer 6 months after. That's the only official recommendation we have so far, and that was, as you guys know, fairly contentious. The FDA and the CDC. I mean, it wasn't hugely contentious. I think they agreed on the basics, but where to draw the line became a little bit contentious. We could talk about that if you want.
So as far as the mix, if you had a Pfizer, if you had a Moderna, should you stick with that?
I mean, the official recommendation is to stick. Yeah, that's what they're saying to do. Now, is that because there's some like fantastic scientific data that you can't mix? I don't think so. I think it's just that's what's been studied, so that's what's being recommended. And the recommendations tend to reflect what's actually been studied. In theory, if you went from a Pfizer to a Moderna or a Moderna to a Pfizer, it shouldn't be problematic. But because we don't have data on that, there could be some hidden issue there that we don't know about. Reactogenicity or who knows. But I know for a fact people have done that. And so anecdotally, it's already happening.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, whether you have Smirnoff or whether you have Grey Goose and Orange.
There's a big difference between Smirnoff and Grey Goose.
Yeah, huge. Especially in a Moscow Mule. Don't ever have a Moscow Mule with Smirnoff. Holy crap!
Yeah.
Hey Doc, real quick, just trying to catch up. So we got so many questions. We won't get to them all. I apologize. Vitamins, D3, zinc, vitamin C. Um, just general immune boosting supplements. Is that a recommendation that?
I mean, I think it's fine to take vitamins. I take vitamins. You know, I give my kids vitamins. The data on COVID treatment or COVID prevention is not great. There's some data that shows if your vitamin D level is high, that's associated with a better outcome. But I'm not aware of any data that shows that taking vitamin D actually itself is going to lower the severity of your illness. One of the things that's come up recently, and I think it's worth talking about because people are running into this left and right, is all of this stuff, the vaccines, the drugs, it all seems like this corporate plot to get people to support these big companies. And why aren't we looking at simple things like vitamins and repurposed old drugs? And there was a big stink online being stirred up by Joe Rogan and Brett Weinstein and the Frontline Critical Care Alliance, or whatever they call themselves, over ivermectin. And I got one of the sources of pure crazy during the Delta wave for me was the ivermectin stuff, which was very, very, very reminiscent of the hydroxychloroquine stuff at the beginning of the pandemic, with people making really angry demands for it based on stuff that they've read online. And here's my answer to that. There are studies looking at repurposed drugs and simple treatments and generic drugs. There's the Together study, which is, I think, McMaster University in Ottawa with a group in Brazil. And they're a multi-arm study looking entirely at repurposed drugs and generic drugs and cheap drugs to try to find what works. There's the Active 6 study, which is now running, which is NIH in the United States, looking at these things. And ivermectin is included in those, by the way. So we are going to have really high quality randomized controlled trial data on a bunch of cheap generic drugs. And I won't be surprised at all if we find that one or two of them is actually helpful. And that's great. But in the absence of that, I'm not jumping on any bandwagons. And there's been a lot of political agendas pushing some of these things. It was hydroxychloroquine last year, and it was ivermectin this year. And there are all kinds of data quality control problems with some of the stuff that's been pushed, including fraud and things like that. So people should be careful. And the idea that we're not looking at repurposed drugs is just nuts. We are. Like I said, there's these two big groups looking at it, and they're finding stuff. There's some preliminary data on fluvoxamine, which is a repurposed drug, but people don't scream at me about fluvoxamine, because that's not trendy on YouTube or whatever, right? So we are finding that some of these repurposed drugs may be helpful, and I'm open-minded. If some of them are, I'm going to use them.
I did hear. I was just listening. It was just recently too. Yesterday or the day before, I heard that there are some active studies. I'm glad you verified that tonight. Ivermectin is the buzzword right now. Everybody's talking ivermectin. The only reason they don't talk about the other one, Doc, is because they can't pronounce it. That's why ivermectin's easy to pronounce. So everybody's on that bandwagon. I agree with. I'm glad you're looking at it. I'm glad you're open minded, because you know what, Doc? If the studies show that it works, then we should use it. Especially if it's cheap, especially if it's efficient, effective.
Yeah.
So
I don't like being condescending towards people for asking the question. I think it's a totally valid question. I think what gets to me is when people fall into these rabbit holes, and they don't do the one thing that we know is 95% effective, right? They don't get vaccinated because they went down some YouTube rabbit hole, and then they get sick, and then they get angry, and then they start demanding things that there's no good evidence for, and they want to treat the hospital like it's a restaurant, right? And we saw some of this during the Delta wave. The most people are really well behaved and grateful and pleasant, and even if they're not vaccinated, I love the vast majority of my patients, and people oftentimes will admit, oh, I was reading the wrong stuff, and I think I was confused about that, and thank you for taking care of me, and how can I help? But there was an edgy kind of hostility with a minority of the patients during this wave, where they had obviously consumed a lot of propaganda before getting sick, and then we're acting really cuckoo and giving the staff a hard time, right while we were in the middle of the wave, and I don't appreciate that. I think that's bad behavior, and we are going to follow the data. If one of these randomized controlled trials shows a mortality benefit to ivermectin, any doctor worth their salt is going to 180 and start prescribing ivermectin, right? But I'm not going to do that based on a meta-analysis of a bunch of BS studies, half of which have already been debunked. Because people are pushing it as a political agenda, because that's weak, and we gotta do our best to not be snake oil pushers, and to try to follow high quality evidence when we make recommendations to people.
They say that sometimes people take certain things may work for them, but
Yeah,
that might be one in a million. So, we
yeah,
just got to go where the science shows that, when there's a large cross section that's been tested and the data comes from there, then it's more reliable, right? At that point. And so I
yeah,
think a lot of times, and again, I've always been one, and Mel will attest to this fact. It's all about the messaging, and we try very hard on the show getting, you know, um, and I consider you an expert in what you do, to come on the show and give the information out, because I can almost guarantee you on this show, 80% of the people will walk away with the information knowing that, yep, and there's still going to be 20% that's going to be still skeptical. But hey, what works for some may not work for all. But the thing is, you go away with something, and if you don't want, wait for the next episode of whoever we bring on and see if that'll appeal to you. And that seems to be like a driving force. But when we go through a lull with no information, that is when I get very very scared, because that's what you can just only assume is that some minds are thinking and just going off, half cocked. You know what I mean? And that's what
yeah.
scares me. That's what
I
scares me.
mean, I think it's good to be skeptical, but the people who are struggling the most right now, they're skeptical, but they're not following the plot, right? So
Mm.
you you can be skeptical of what you're hearing from the government. You can be skeptical of corporate medicine. And by the way, I am. My job for 5 years before I came over to the Big Island was I was the antibiotic stewardship person at Queens Punch Bowl. So I got
Mm.
I got a kind of modest salary support, and my job was basically to keep pharma out of the hospital. I mean, it wasn't that. My job was to make sure that we were using antibiotics appropriately at the hospital. But part of that meant keeping those guys out of the hospital when they were trying to get us to use antibiotics inappropriately, right? And I
Mm.
took that very seriously. And I had very good hygiene. I didn't meet with the reps. Certainly didn't do any speaking fees or anything like that with them. I considered myself almost like a goalie, because there is this tendency for pharma to try to sometimes get us to use stuff that we don't really need to use because it's brand name or whatever, right? And I would never say that that's not a valid concern, but you got to follow the plot, man. That doesn't mean that you just go through a respiratory epidemic and ingest naturopathic stuff with no evidence and avoid getting vaccinated. The only way out of a pandemic is through immunity. And the companies making the vaccines, a lot of the vaccines failed. The ones that succeeded were vetted very heavily. And I have no problem, as somebody whose job it was to sort of try to block pharma from getting inappropriate things into the hospital, I have no problem letting something in when it's appropriate, when it's actually serving a social good. And that's following the plot, right? And then likewise with stuff that doesn't work. If it doesn't work, then my response is, well, prove that it works. Otherwise, we shouldn't be doing it, because there's downsides to doing things that don't work. Um, one big difference with this wave, guys, was the monoclonal antibodies, which I should have mentioned right up at the beginning. But we actually had an effective antiviral therapy this wave, which we didn't have during previous waves. And the typical trajectory is somebody comes in, about a week to 2 weeks into the illness, and by the time they come into the hospital that late, they may already be clearing the virus. The virus may already be moving on, but they've got all this damage, immune-mediated damage. So, giving them an antiviral that late often doesn't work. It was very disappointing. As an ID doctor, I really want an antiviral medicine. I want something to kill the beast with, right? I want like a missile or a tomahawk or something, to go right after the thing. We didn't have that. We had steroids and stuff like that. I hate prescribing steroids as an ID doctor. It's like the opposite direction. I'm telling the immune system to turn off because it's hyperactive, right? And the data for steroids suggested a mortality benefit. So even though I don't like it, I said, okay, I'm going to follow the data. So I'm doing it, right? But what I've always wanted was a good antiviral. And we finally had a good antiviral this wave, which was the monoclonal. So, we set these things up at scale very quickly. And I got to give the hospital leadership credit, because they recognized it, really throughout the state, but Queens in particular recognized it. and said, we're going to do this. And these are highly contagious patients. And we were getting them into clinic, outpatients, before they get sick, before they crash. And we're getting them into clinic, and we're bringing them into the hospital, highly contagious, setting up separate rooms for them, and then running these antiviral infusions right into them. And the data on it is pretty excellent. It prevents most of the hospitalizations if we can get them in there early, right? And then we had Scott, who took it to the next level and started doing subcutaneous monoclonal antibodies in people's houses, to get it really out into the community, right, for people that can't get into the hospital. So this was real progress, between that and the rapid antigen testing, which, even though it's not nearly at the scale I think it needs to be, it was more available this wave than the previous wave. We were using it, pre-rounding and stuff like that. I've been getting rapid antigen tested every week before I see patients, which was not available to me before, right? So that I'm not a vector, right? And so between the rapid antigen testing and the monoclonal antibodies, we had some better tools this time. And we were able to keep a lot of people out of the hospital who otherwise would have crashed and ended up in the hospital. So that's the kind of stuff that excites me. And then there's these two big trials looking at repurposed medicines, cheapo generic medicines and other things, which I think we're going to have a couple of hits at some point. So we'll have some medicine that comes out of that. And then there's some oral antiviral medicine. And when we get a good oral antiviral medicine, monoclonals are going to get retired because we'll just be able to give people a pill to take at home, during the first few days of their illness. And hopefully it'll be able to avoid hospitalization. And I think we're a couple of months away from seeing those results, but there's at least 3 oral antivirals that are in phase 3 trials right now. So each wave has been different. And ultimately, here's my thought, guys. If we can get, forget 60%, 70%, if we can get 90%, 95% of eligible people vaccinated, right? That takes the pressure off the hospital. That dramatically reduces transmission. That gets us to the point where when we get hit, we have a little simmer, but we don't have a big, huge wave, right? We combine that with rapid antigen testing for vulnerable parts of the community, schools, post-arrival, stuff like that, prisons, right? We combine that with antiviral therapy for people who have breakthrough and are high risk. And suddenly this thing is not such a terrible beast anymore. Suddenly we're coming out of it, right? And that's what I'm looking forward to. And I think we should be optimistic that we can get there, but we got to do smart things to get there. We got to have the rapid antigen test. We got to build that capacity, right? That should be part of our state going forward. We got to get vaccinated. What I've been telling the politicians, if they still talk to me, sometimes they do, sometimes they don't, is if you're going to have a fight, have the right fight. Anything you do to try to control this pandemic, people are going to say, you're a tyrant, you're a bully, you're taking away my freedom. If you make them wear masks, they're going to say that. If you shut down bars, they're going to say that. Whatever you do, they're going to not like you. You're going to have people who don't like you. So get people vaccinated, because that may be a fight, but that's a fight worth having, because that's what's actually going to get us through this. That's the immunity way out of this, right? And then, you can say to them, well, you may not like me, and you may think I'm a bully, and you may think I'm a tyrant, but at least we got this thing. At least I've done something useful. At least I've gotten us through this. And I would rather die on that hill. If people are going to hate my guts, I want to at least have done something useful, right? And so I think that's the gospel that I've been preaching. And unfortunately, it is hard to get people to get vaccinated, and there's very strong feelings about it, and people get very angry, and that's the history of every epidemic that we've ever whipped. We've had to go through that phase.
Mm-hmm. Well,
Doc, real quick, and I don't know if you know this, but of all the breakthrough cases, has anyone taken a look, and real quick, and then we'll get to your book, but any study or anybody know of all the breakthrough cases, which vaccine has fared better based on breakthrough cases? I have not heard anyone mention that. But
Yeah. The only really rigorous data I've seen on that is that Mayo paper that I mentioned before, where they looked at vaccine efficacy. So they counted cases, and then they were able to correlate that with which vaccines people have had. I don't think like the state of Hawaii, for example, is doing that regularly. But with the Mayo Clinic, what they showed was with their vaccine efficacy paper was that the Moderna was the best. I think at 6+ months out, it was still in the high 70s or 80s for any kind of infection, right? Maybe I
Mhm.
think it was 70s. I got to look it up again. I apologize if I'm a little bit off. The Pfizer had dropped, to 50 to 60% or so, and I think the Johnson and Johnson was somewhere close to the Pfizer range. So there was some difference, and like I said, that was the first time I actually saw a meaningful difference between Pfizer and Moderna. Up until then, they had appeared kind of equivalent in my mind. They're both mRNA vaccines. They're both highly effective the first several months, but there was some separation, and I think it has to do with the dose and maybe the interval. So this is why I think we're going to see some tweaking of the regimens going forward, and what we do in 2021 and early 2022 may not be the way we handle this disease 5 years later. Once it's endemic and we're just trying to control it, we may have slightly different dosing regimens or intervals. To be fair, it's kind of hard to be perfect when you're trying to build the jet plane mid crash, right? So it's not surprising that there's been some differences here. They all work really well for keeping people out of the hospital. So I actually think the Johnson and Johnson vaccine. I've said this before, but I think it's kind of gotten an unfair bad rap, because it had those lower kind of frontline vaccine efficacy numbers. But I'm finding there's a real niche for it with patients that are vaccine skeptical or don't want to get vaccinated for any reason, or don't trust mRNA vaccines because they're new. I'm like, all right, just get your Johnson and Johnson then. It's an older vaccine platform. It's an older technology. There ought to be no objection. There's nothing
Uh,
really weird about it, right? And you just get one shot, and you're not going to get hospitalized, and you're less likely to kill somebody. So just do it. And that's an argument that's worked on a number of people. It doesn't work on everybody, of course. Um, so
I'll tell you
I
what.
in that way.
I tell you, Doc. I think the mRNA vaccine. I think why people liked it so much. It was that studies have shown those people who liked it like ice cream, and you know what the relationship to that was? That
What?
because you have to keep it in a deep freeze, they love ice cream, and that's why they win with it.
I think Charlie, the state should hire Charlie as their marketing manager. I think they should.
I think a little humor would be good actually right
Yeah,
now, because
absolutely.
Hey,
they're
there
so
it is.
serious when they do
So,
public
Doc,
health.
tell us about plague doctors, Doc.
Yeah, yeah. So this web page just went live, guys. So I think this is like the second time I'm looking at it, and the first time was right before I came on. So the book is being published by Watermark, which is a local Hawaiian publisher. If you buy directly from the web page, uh, it's supporting local publishing and local distribution. So I think that's cool. And then it will be available on Amazon and other places. I think a little bit later, but it's now available by pre-order. And yeah, I'm jazzed about it. I think the cover art's really cool, and it looked real smart when I was reading through the manuscript that they came up with the formatting. Um, I did put in an afterwards to take into account the delta wave, because the original draft of this was finished like in April, May, so it's up to date as best as I can get it up to date. But really, it's the story of me being an infectious disease doctor and kind of wading into the chaos as it happened to me. And there's some stuff in there about my own feelings about that, and my own journey through it. But as the book develops, it really gets into my interactions with the county and the state, and how Hawaii did in particular, and what I think we need to be doing going forward, so that we can do even better next time. I don't know if I can share a screen, but there's one graph from there that I could share if you want me
Please,
to.
please.
How do I do that? Let's see here.
It looks like the strip with the arrow. You see the strip with the arrow on the bottom? It says you
Oh
got your
yeah,
mic.
The
share
third,
screen. It
the
says
yeah, yeah.
okay. It looks like I can't. I guess you guys got to let me.
No, go ahead. Just click it.
Okay.
What does it tell you?
It says choose what to share. Okay, entire screen, I guess. Okay, but it's not letting me share.
Is it on a tab? Is it on a Chrome tab?
Yeah.
Try share the
Let me
Chrome
look
tab.
at the Chrome tag. Okay. Let's see here.
Try take his name off the screen. No, and
Choose what
not
to show.
yeah.
Okay. Oh,
Oh,
let's see if I can get a window. Uh, oh yeah, I'm going to share this. Okay. I don't know. Is this showing up now?
yep. Mm-hmm.
Okay, so this is just one of the figures from the book. It's one of several figures, but the dark black there is Maui and the light gray is Kauai, and I wanted at least one figure in the book to sort of illustrate the importance of border control. And what you can see here is the cases per 100,000, and as we know, safe travel starts on October 15th, and we have very low incidence in both Maui and Kauai, and then after October 15th you see both islands begin to go up, and then Kauai exits on December 1st, and you can just see what having really good border control and really good public health does. You basically extinguish the epidemic on Kauai, and Maui shoots up to 20 cases per 100,000. So there's a lot of discussion in the book about border control and about what constitutes good border control, and quarantine and pre-travel testing and post-arrival testing. But I think we actually ran a real experiment here in Hawaii, and nothing speaks louder to me than the actual end result of that, because you really can see visually what happened there between October 15th and December 1st, and then after December up until April when Kauai reopened, right? Um, so there's no question in my mind that going forward as an island state, we should have a border control scheme that tries to replicate the Kauai portion of that graph for any future pandemic. And one way to do that is to do what you did, which is just shut down everything and have a 14-day quarantine for everybody coming in. A better way to do it would be to take what we've learned from rapid antigen testing and say, okay, maybe initially we shut down and have a 14-day quarantine. But then once we get on our feet and we get our rapid antigen testing up and running, we do something like a centralized quarantine with a test out, based on the biology of the virus, day 3, day 5, day 7. So these are the kinds of conversations I'm trying to instigate with the book. And I'm sure I'm going to step in some doo-doo doing that.
Yeah, you just did. You just did. Because they all watch this show. They'll all watch this show afterwards, and good. You can take some of the heat off of Charlie and my shoulders a
Well, if
little
I
bit.
if
No
I've
problem.
stepped in some doo doo, my suggestion for anybody whose doo doo I'm stepping in is don't die on the hill of inadequate border control.
Absolutely.
There's no reason to. It's obvious that if we had a post arrival test, that would be better, and it's obvious that if we had a better enforced quarantine system, that would be better. And nobody should be trying to claim that that's not the case. What I'm not doing is I'm not attacking the pre-travel test. I think the pre-travel test was absolutely necessary, and I defend it in the book. And on the day that you test, the pre-travel test is very good, but we know human behavior is what it is, and people get exposed after they test, or maybe they're just not shedding yet when they test. And there are reasons why we need more than that. Every bubble that has been successful, whether it be the NBA bubble or what they did at the Olympics or the SEC conference, which Miskovich helped with, has involved multiple testing. And this is key infrastructure as far as I'm concerned. There should be no argument about this, and nobody should be ideological about it. I think having a pre-travel test was an enormous step forward, and the purpose of my book is not to attack that, but I just want to demonstrate that we actually can bring in additional steps that would help the situation. So, did I get my foot out of the doo-doo a little bit, or not?
Woo! With us, you have, but yeah, I appreciate you, Doc. Gosh, man, it's always fun. The time goes by so quick. I will, for those of you, I will post that link for the book up on my page right after the show. Go ahead and get your copy. I'll get my copy tonight, Doc. And when you come down for Charlie's concert after the pandemic is over, we'll have you there to sign all the books that people buy. Look at Charlie's face. Look at
I'm
Charlie's.
looking forward to that party, guys. I really am.
Oh, everybody is, man. It's. I think it's up to like 5,000 people already.
Oh wow.
It'll be awesome,
You
man.
got to get your ticket. Well, we'll give you a ticket, but see, the reason everyone, I'm telling everyone, get your tickets early is because Mel is paying for the whole thing. See, so
Nice.
I'll just post this comment up real quick. Mahalo, Doc. Tonight you took us to class and it's well informed and keep us knowledgeable. Thanks. You hope you return soon for part two. God bless and take care. I think that's kind of the general message that we're seeing from a lot of people. Unfortunately, we just don't have the time to share it all. But anyway, Doc, thank you so much,
Thank you.
man.
I appreciate you guys, and I appreciate everybody for chiming in.
Charlie,
Well, as always, it's great to have Jonathan on with us. I mean, he is an individual, and everybody listens, and he shares a lot of good information, and I can't thank him enough. I'm so happy and hope that all of our viewers tonight, will walk away with a little bit more knowledge. Maybe it was something they never heard of before, but he was able to share his insight because he practices it, and I appreciate that. And folks, every so often we'll come across tough times, but we're getting to where uh, it's looking a little brighter. Okay, but in order for us to keep on that trend, we just have to practice safety no matter what. We can relax a little, but it's like anything in life that we consume, we just can't overdo it because we just have to be within range. And if we have to pull on the reins to bring things back in line, we can do it safely. If we go past the point of no return, then bad things will happen. So let's just be cautious, but let's enjoy. Let's be pleasant because we need to be pleasant to one another. And I'm saying this wholeheartedly because there's a lot of tension out there. I see it on the roads. I see it at the airport, and it doesn't have to be that way. We just have to be, good within ourselves. Always be pono about whatever we do. And in life, all we try to do is do the best to help others. And let's continue that route. Let's not keep things just for ourselves, but let's help others as well. So with that said, Mel, I turn it back to you, brother.
thanks, Charlie. And again, thank you, Doc. You were excited. This stuff excites you, and that's why we like bringing you on, infectious disease specialist, not a YouTuber, not a Google University graduate, but a true infectious disease specialist that answers honestly, candidly, and very open-minded. And I think our viewers, as well as Charlie and myself, appreciate that tremendously. I will definitely order that book tonight. Guys, I will post that book up on my page. Please go ahead and make your orders tonight. Let's help out just get educated, informed and educated, man. That's what we do. Tomorrow night, folks. Oh, I just want to remind everybody, Isenberg this Saturday, 9 to 1. The clinic, the facilities will be there. Please stop by if you need a vaccine or support services, rent assistance, electricity, or utility assistance.
Yep.
Saturday, Isenberg Park, right there in Lihui. Tomorrow night, Konishki, Saliva, Tisano. No, Friday night.
Friday
Sorry,
night.
tomorrow night. Tomorrow night, Charlie and I are gonna take off. We're gonna do a Zoom. Just talk to each other like this. But we're not going live. Just going. I need a good laugh. But Friday night,
Hey,
Saliva, Tisano,
out of my
Konishki.
account, they need a good laugh.
Do not miss that show. It'll be fun. And in 2 weeks, I just confirmed today, Vicky Cayetano will be on our show. Not next Wednesday, but the following Wednesday. Just keep that in mind. That'll be a fun, interesting. She's also a very strong proponent of testing. I found out today. So with that, guys, you guys stay safe. God bless. We love you guys. Thanks, Doc. Stay safe and mahalo for what you do for everybody.
Yep. Thank you, Doc.
Thank you. Good night.